Hello and welcome to the October PRPOI live session. As India's largest platform dedicated to the upskilling of the entire PR community, we deep dive into real issues, questions, and challenges that the PR industry faces. I'm Tarunjeet Rattan, founder of PRPOI, and today we pick up a very interesting subject for discussion. You know, 2024 has been what I would call the year of the RFPs. For the uninitiated, RFP stands for Request for Proposal. Sometimes a lot of PR pitches, PR briefs are also disguised as RFPs. Now, as more and more brands wake up to the power of PR, they are now venturing out to look for a PR agency that can work for them. So, the mood at most brands and agencies this year has been RFP. Should I take one out? Should I not take one out? Right? So the question to ask is, should you RFP or not RFP? And yes, all pun was intended. That's the question to answer, along with how, what, when, where, and why. The request for proposal emails across verticals has been overwhelming this year. But should you respond to all of them? And if you do, then how? How do you know this is the right one for your agency? How do you put together an RFP if you are a brand? And can ChatGPT really help you put the right one together? So we will get into this discussion with Aakanksha Gupta, the founder and CEO of The Other Circle, and Sunaina Jairath, CMO and CCO of Bencos Life. Before we dive into the world of RFPs, let me give a shout out to CommsAdda for partnering with us for this conversation, and my co-founders Sonali, Sokhal, and Pooja Trehan for continuing to bring valuable conversations on PR to the forefront. Let me add them on. Welcome to the panel, Sunaina and Aakanksha.
Hi, Tarun.
Hi guys. Hi Tarun. Hi everybody on the call, and thanks to CommsAdda and PRPOI for this interesting discussion on a Saturday morning.
Absolutely. I'm so delighted that the both of you could join us. So let's dive into it. Sunaina, let's start with you. Now, before we get into the subject, our audience would want to know a little bit more about you. You've had a very interesting career that spans across PR agencies, public policy, CopCom, and marketing, and you are from pure sciences, right? How did you decide on each transition? Was this a planned strategy? How did you go about planning this out for yourself?
This reminds me of my age, this question. Hi everybody. So as Tarun said, I've been doing this for close to 21 years now, and as I said, reminds me how old I am. But I think for me, it's truly happened. Man proposes, God disposes. I'm a pure science student. I prepared for medical, got into some colleges, but then realized that I really wanted to be financially independent, hence wanted to start earning as early as possible. But because I was a pure science student, science was the only stream available to me in college. So I did zoology honors, which was really interesting. And I was telling our co-founder of Bencos that the current role that I'm doing as the head of marketing and communication for Bencos is one of those moments where I've got an opportunity to actually practice the pure sciences that I did. Did a long stint with Perfect Relations Dentsu, then went to Cred, then went to Ashirwad, and here I am now. So comms happened to me, and I realized I've always been a debater. I've been very active in my school and college. So it was not a difficult choice. Plus, I think the one takeaway for me why comms worked for me also is because I'm naturally a very curious person. I love to explore multiple things, and being in an agency for close to 18 years gives you that opportunity where you become sector agnostic. So that's the life cycle, and that's where I am.
That's fantastic. It's surprising how any amount of education that you do never goes to waste. Somewhere it all connects and loops back together, right?
Absolutely.
That brings me to Aakanksha. Aakanksha, I see from your profile that you have been very partial to agencies in your career. Is that what inspired you to take a bite out of the PR entrepreneurship world? The pie, and what inspired you to get into this absolutely maddening and crazy world?
I promise you everything was accidental and not by design. So I think a little bit of what Sunaina said on man proposes, God disposes. I think my first love has always been writing. I was a very, very shy child way back when, and books were always my thing. I preferred books to people. So I think just curiosity as well at a certain level. But I think I got into speaking just because I wanted to overcome fears as a young adult. So that's how, honestly, just the curiosity into the world of communication started. I've done everything I've done, quite frankly, very accidentally, which means that it was never an intention to start an agency. It was never an intention to get into PR. It was always an intention to listen to stories, tell stories, eventually meet people, because people are the best stories themselves. So that actually just paved the way, I think, in a certain sense. And I think I'm somebody who gets bored very easily. So being a part of an agency, or being a part of that kind of a chaotic world, I think just keeps throwing things at you that, do not allow for boredom. So I think that's honestly the core at a certain level of doing what I do. And also, I think the best way to upskill is on the job, right? So I think, even when we were growing up, we probably did not have the facilities or privilege that a lot of us now do. So I think the best way for us, at least my family, to have done better was to earn, थोड़े से पैसे कमाओ, और फिर आगे, learn करो, फिर पैसे कमाओ. So serendipity mixed with accidental entrepreneurship mostly.
It's amazing. Over the last 5 or 6 years, I've been speaking to so many PR professionals across verticals, across geographies, and somehow there is one thread of commonality, some threads of commonality, I would say, that run through each of these, very interesting PR professionals who are doing really well in their careers, and still in other threads of commonality that run between, PR entrepreneurs. I think it warrants another discussion and another session for us when we will talk about the accidental CEO versus the planned CEO. Right. So with that, let's get into the discussion, get into the subject of discussion today. What is the right time for a brand to issue an RFP? Let's start with that before we get into, more detailed questions. So Nena, I'd like you to address that first.
So, as you said, I've been on both sides of the table. I think at Cred, at Ashirwad, and currently where I am, I think it's there are multiple ways to look at it. But I think if I give you a short answer, when your top leadership aligns on the need of working with a set of specialists externally, is the right time to go for an RFP. When you are at a stage in your journey where in sourcing of expertise, skills, and talent is better for you, because things are changing, you need a lot more. Also, you need a lot more interpersonal relationships, you need a lot more work to be done in house. It's not in your and also budgetary constraints. It's not in your interest to outsource skills, talent, expertise. But when you are at a stage where you know that the in-house talent needs to be supplemented with external expertise, and your brand is at a stage where you need to either expand in multiple geographies, and you can definitely, as an in-house person, you can't set up operations everywhere, but you also need core skills. For example, if you're going in for an IPO, if you're going in for a major brand overhaul. So if there is a major life moment in the cycle of a brand or an organization, or you're at a stage where you feel that now to scale up, you need external expertise, help, skills, that's when you need to go for an RFP. Short answer to your question.
Interesting. So, Akansha, based on your experience, could you help us understand from an agency perspective how and what you would tweak to this answer? When should a brand be sending out an RFP?
I think I align largely with what Sunaina said. I think big life moments are probably an ideal time. What I could add on perhaps is, you have a lot of international brands that enter the country. So I think it's a smart call then to float an RFP, because I think that just going by recommendations, I feel, is not enough. We have a lot of very young professionals who are doing great work, right? Very, very young boutique creative firms, or for that matter, larger format firms who perhaps have expanded into just newer business verticals. So I feel that floating an RFP in that sense could add a lot of value. So let's say a new brand that's entered the country. I also feel
Right.
diversification direction is a smart call at that point of time. So if you're a brand that's traditionally been an FMCG brand, and let's say you want to get into B2B for argument's sake, so I think at that point of time, maybe your communication skill set or the people or the talent that you work with perhaps have a certain kind of thinking. So I don't think it's only supplementation. I think sometimes agencies of our nature could also perhaps just bring a larger thought pool to the table, probably add, also with the way marketing goes now. So I think obviously add a lot of sales mechanism, sales strategy to the table as well. So I also feel that a right time for an RFP to probably be floated is when you're looking at achieving audacious sales goals. It's happened with us in the past. I feel that when you've reached, let's say, level X and you want to reach 3X, we do a lot of business in D2C. So I do understand that alongside burn, narrative building is equally important. We've seen that time and again with multifarious examples. So just some additions to what Sunaina mentioned.
Absolutely, very valid points. But let's kind of set the base tone here. What makes a good RFP? What would be your recommendations to a brand when they're putting this together? Sunena, would you like to address that first? Your top five things that you think that they need to include.
Top
What
five
makes it
things.
a good RFP?
I may not have a top five. I don't subscribe to BuzzFeed lists that much, but I think most important as a client, and I've done RFPs as a client as well, clarity of thought on what you want out of the RFP process is extremely important. You cannot, you should not ask for moon, star, Mars, Neptune, Pluto, and some other galaxy also when your requirement is probably extremely focused. Just because you have that position where you are doing an RFP and you want to take inputs from a lot of agencies or experts out in the market, doesn't mean you need to start asking for all sorts of information, deliverables, and everything. Be clear, be absolutely as crystal clear as possible. You can be in your. Just give me one moment, please. Sorry, perils of a working mother. Yeah. So be absolutely clear in your requirements for an RFP. It's always a good idea to give an indication of your budget. Not that that limits anybody's thinking, but again, it makes the process more seamless for you. Be also very clear in terms of how you're going to measure. So the measurement and metrics are also important. Again, that help whoever you are looking to engage with from an RFP, whether an agency or any, even a set of even individuals, on how they should think about the process of delivery and be able to distinguish between what would be a good output and what would be a good outcome. Hope that helps.
Absolutely. Aakanksha, would you want to add to that?
Actually, Sunaina, when you were speaking, I made some notes. So I'm sorry if this sounds a little bit like a vent, but these are all the things I wish I had in RFPs that I responded to. So I'm going to take a go at it. Sorry, Tarun, if I'm vociferous about this. I wish
Absolutely.
there was something like a creative measurement matrix, which means that a lot of RFPs ask for creative ideas, for a certain task. And I wish there was a way to understand how they would be measured. So what creativity even means, what direction they need to go towards. A lot of them have positioning, statements, right, objectives, and where we want to go. But I wish they were beyond words, deeper insights as to the why, of it. So I can understand, okay, it's not good enough to say we want to be the best tourism destination. I think it's important to understand that in context of something else, perhaps. Potential crisis scenarios. So I think that when you onboard an agency for a large period of time, which is what RFPs do, is the partner capable of handling certain crisis situations that you foresee, which means that they don't have to be current crisis situations, but do they understand foreign policy? Do they understand language barriers, which is when we get these great projects and we make a little bit of money and then we realize it's not going well, and then goli maro to PR culture, I feel, at a certain level. And last but not the least, my personal grievance, which is evaluation criteria across levels of agencies. I feel RFPs are very skewed to larger format companies that have an X amount of experience. But what if I was really good at what I did? Maybe it's a very TOC problem. I don't know if anybody else out there shares it. But I wish there were, okay, if you had 5 years of experience, this is how we'll evaluate you. Vis-a-vis 10 years, this is how we'll evaluate you. And then at a larger board saying, okay, we've selected one from here or say two from here, then you need to sit at the same metric. So end of soliloquy, but this is what I feel an RFP should have.
Absolutely.
Aakanksha, can I just, sorry, Tarun, Aakanksha, to your point, I think I told this to Tarun also, and she was fairly surprised by that. I have in my role with Denso, for a number of years, I was responsible for filling all government and PSU RFPs. I have to tell you that this evaluation of agencies filling in has perhaps been best cracked by government and PSU. They have
Yes.
very clear idea of who they want, and they also understand why they want. So if
You
you're
know,
taking Amitabh Bachchan to make a project, you want an agency that has a 100 crore turnover so that they can manage all of it. But they also understand that if I'm going in Bihar for a small project, I don't need a big agency because a big agency comes with its own overheads and everything. The challenge, or at least what I feel, having filled RFPs and having issued RFPs, is that what I said before, when you releasing an RFP feels like a power. We forget with great power comes great responsibility as well. And we want the kitchen sink
I
and
love that.
yeah.
everything with, because I have issued an RFP, I want the kitchen sink and everything along with it. We forget that our requirement is maybe perhaps best serviced by a mid-size agency or a new boutique firm. And you don't really, and if you, and which is why I said that if you don't, and who else will know your, as a client, who else will know your budgets better than you and your set of people, decision makers. So if you know your budget is only about 3 lakh or 2 lakh rupees a month, then what's the point of asking agencies that wouldn't work for less than 5 lakhs a month? And in that process, you're already eliminating, as you said, you're eliminating smart boutique firms who will probably give you way more importance, work with you way more closely. Because for any big agency, you will be and I've been in agency, so I know this, you will be a tier 10 client with, with no way of getting attention when you have any challenge. So which is why I said that great power, great responsibility. And RFP is not a document to just start collecting creative ideas, information, and then say, but paise nahi hai.
But I want to
I
add
think
one more piece. Sorry, Sunaina. Sorry,
no.
Tarun. My last submission to that. You know what? Very honestly, it makes us do is let's assume that it's a great RFP that you want to be a part of, right? So a lot of small, mid-sized agencies perhaps shadow or combine with someone larger. While I think that's great and I think that's perfect, what happens is, and I feel that's the great con of it, which is that I'm sitting in a room with somebody else who, let's say, has been running social media for 10, 15 years, has no inkling of how PR works. I don't have a voice in that room, right? So I feel that then it's misrepresentation of our work. So our company just stopped shadowing with anybody else. We said it's okay. We will say no to that business. We'd rather not be misrepresented and be one little cog of a wheel than actually get a piece of the pie and do great work, right? So I also agree. I mean, it would be great if we could make that happen as an industry collectively.
But it's very interesting. You've made a very interesting point. First, I think the evaluation matrix, as we call it, the evaluation metric versus the size of the agency versus the budget versus the skill set, I think needs different criteria for every, you know, I would say turnover of that particular business, right? And it all has to be centered around the need of the hour. This is where, okay, I completely resonate with what Aakanksha is saying in terms of, collaborating with other agencies. I think collaboration is fantastic, but when you kind of collaborate with somebody who's not from the vertical or not from the same set of expertise, a number of years of expertise, it becomes challenging for one to represent the other, right? Now, I think all of this has a core possibility or a core challenge, which is when you throw the spanner of chat gpt into it, right? For a lot of times, I think in 2024 specifically, where a lot of RFPs are being collected, put into a chat gpt format, and these are being generated. So while you might just want a particular, a fruit, right, from a tree, and that could kind of possibly suffice your needs at this point of time, what is being generated out there is the request for a complete garden at the cost of the fruit, right? Now, while I understand it's a great tool and I do use it frequently to be able to spin off ideas and possibly use as a resonating board, right? What would you recommend to brands using Chat GPT to really help them put that right one together? From a Chat GPT perspective, one best advice. Akansha, go
See,
first.
let me structure my thoughts. You go first, Akanksha.
Curveball. Uh, Here's what I think. I think language makes a big difference. I think at least some English purists out there, I think we understand that a certain word stands for a certain meaning. Um, my fear with chat gpt rfps is the fact that you can see through it, right? Like you can see an rfp that's written by a human vis-a-vis an rfp that's written by chat gpt. So I think a lot of times you don't understand the language. So my request would be to use chat gpt to simplify versus um, confuse. It doesn't have to sound fancy, it just needs to sound correct, and it needs to say what it needs to say. I also want to give you another con of this, Tarun, which has happened with us. A client that we pitched to, I think almost 4 or 5 years ago, MNC. We tried to work together. It did not work out at that point of time. 3 years ago, released an RFP, which was our scope of work rehashed from ChatGPT into an RFP. So what I'm just trying to get at is that why does, and Sunaina, you'll probably know this better than me because I have not made an RFP professionally. I've probably been at the receiving end of it and at the analysis end of it. But when it came to me, I laughed quite a bit because there was quite a lot of jargon for just 10 pieces of deliverable that we ultimately needed. So, for example, if somebody says, we would like to get 10 media coverages, we would like you to do 14 distributions a year. What does that mean? What does 14 distributions a year mean? Why can't we just be very simple around, okay, does that mean press releases? Does that mean press notes? Does that mean speeches? I think it confuses. So I think if we can use it to simplify, that would be great.
Can I answer this with a Calvin and Hobbes quote?
Absolutely.
Sure.
Okay, I can't share it, but I will tell you. So, Calvin and Hobbes are writing, and Calvin says, I used to hate writing assignments, but now I enjoy them. I realized that the purpose of writing is to inflate weak ideas, obscure poor reasoning, and inhibit clarity. I think when you use ChatGPT for creating the whole RFP, that's exactly what you're doing. ChatGPT should not, it can, but it should not think for you. It is not sitting in your organization. It doesn't know what you need as an output or an outcome. What it should be used for is that once you have put your thoughts together as to what you want an agency or an expert that you're working with to deliver for you in as much clarity as possible, ChatGPT can help you make your documentation more succinct. It can help you structure it better. But if you start using it, then as I said, you are inflating weak ideas, obscuring poor reasoning, and inhibiting clarity. And I will just leave it at that.
I trust Calvin and Hobbes to get it right every time, and
Every time.
I'd add my two bits here. Apart from what both Akansha and Sunana has spoken about, when you do use Chat GPT to create an RFP, refine an RFP, or may simplify things, when you're looking at copying it, there is a button at the bottom of the text which allows you to copy it and paste it. Do not use the control C, control V option, because then we know it is ChatGPT generated, right? The lines that come along with it are a dead giveaway, right? Small practical tip if you'd like to use it. However, while since we are talking about this, I'd like both of you to kind of opine upon the fact that for our audience, on how are RFPs different for different verticals. Sunaina, you mentioned government RFPs have been fantastic. Akansha, you've had a different experience with FMCG. I know startups have also started floating RFPs Interestingly, politics, entertainment, they all, I think, have adopted this format where they're looking at curating this. I want to understand from the both of you, for the benefit of our audience, how does each differ from in each vertical? How do RFPs differ in each vertical?
Okay. See, I
Sunena,
can give you
you
an
want to go
example because I've done enough of government RFPs, PSU RFPs. I think government PSU and that NGOs, a lot of them have got the game of RFP fairly right, and they have a fairly well-defined process. So they will have a request for qualification, an RFQ as a precursor to an RFP. They will have an RFP, and then they will have a consultation session and everything. Simply because the decision makers are a lot in any government or PSU setup. And funnily enough, I think most government and PSU entities, at least for the purpose of RFP, get their requirements very correct. While they are also smart to insert a small clause that says that not limited to this, but they understand that, I will need 10 press releases done, for example, and I will need it to be sent out in these many places, and I will need these many, video clips done and everything. That could also be because they've traditionally always had a PR department, and I'm not going into the discussion about the benefit, pros, cons of having a PR department, what a government PR department does. But I think from the purpose of clarity, both in terms of deliverables as well as the process. Usually, government PSU RFPs are very detailed, and therefore, as
right?
an agency, if you decide to take it, you know that you're going to be spending a fair amount of time cutting a fair amount of trees in printing out long sheets of paper for qualification, this evaluation, that evaluation. They will ask you for a lot of declaration. I mean, they already have your Aadhaar, but they will still ask you for a fairly long list of references, this, that. So their process is not for the faint hearted. It's a very well developed process. So if you are which is why most big agencies tend to have a specific a team that just looks at government PSUs and all these RFPs. Monies are also fairly high, so that makes sense. A different question whether you can get your money or not, but so that's, I think, government and PSUs have sort of got that right. Um, in corporates, I have seen a variety of corporates. Some tend to be very professional, and therefore will use a very set format. My challenge has been both from the agency and the client side is when RFPs try to get creative or quirky. And then you sort of tend to forget that an RFP is also supposed to get the right set of information, get the right set of credentials, and be able to help you find the right partner. But sometimes, at the cost of being quirky and creative, we tend to forget the main purpose of an RFP. And then, as an agency person, you are left wondering, ki, कहना क्या चाहते हो? So
Give
that,
us,
I
give
think,
us an example. Give us an example. What do you mean when you say when they try to get quirky?
um, I won't have names, but I remember looking at an RFP from a entertainment client where
Right.
the entire RFP was designed with movie references and all, which was a fun read. I love to read. I would love to read that RFP as a book, but it left a lot of us wondering because, frankly, personal opinion, RFPs should give you a clear sense of where this process is going, what
Right.
is asked of the partner or the agency that you want to onboard. And if 10 people in a room of an agency have 10 different ideas from that RFP, then frankly, that's not job well done by an RFP. So great insight of taking quotes from Diwar and Sholay and Kuch Kuch Hota Hai and all that stuff. But if at the end of the whole reading session, 10 people on a table are left wondering कि यार इनको brand building करनी है या do they want to expand into different geographies? Do they want leadership profiling done? मतलब how will they evaluate us? What is it that they're wanting? Then it's not a job well done. So I think
Absolutely.
that clarity of purpose as to what you want out of an RFP is important. Young brands are, and again, I think it's also a purpose. It's also a measure of how long has a sector or a brand or the entity that's issuing the RFP been doing PR and comms. If you're fairly young to it, then I guess it you don't understand that clarity of what an RFP needs to give is a work in progress.
Absolutely. Akanksha?
Um, So I feel RFPs should not be short. Some of the RFPs we've tackled over the years are really, really small. And I think that's for want for detail. So I feel that it's okay for something to be really long. It's okay for something to be tedious as long as it's specific, as long as it's detailed, as long as it's informative. So I think a good RFP allows for all your questions to be answered and then some, at least at a basic level. I also want to chat a little bit about the RFP process itself. So while the document is one part of it, I think there is a follow-up Q&A session, right? Which some of the best, RFPs that are floated across, do account for. Which means that hey, there are common questions that, and I think this is well done in tourism as a sector, for example, where what they do is they float an RFP. You've applied for it, and then there's like an open house where you've come in, they've already answered common questions that you may have. So great Copcom who's sitting there and saying, hey, we think you're going to have XYZ kind of questions. We're addressing them already. Anything else that you may have, put it on the chat. And if you don't, then you'll be given per agency a minute to ask a certain kind of question, and then we'll move on or we'll combine. So I think it takes a lot of intelligence at both ends. The person who's created the RFP at a certain level, as well as the person who answers it. One of the best RFPs that I have seen in my small career is Duolingo as a brand. So I want to call them out. Um, I feel the Copcom gentleman is a class apart as well. I really wish I had the opportunity to work with him, but one of the best RFPs I have seen thus far. Also, as someone who heads comms, absolutely available to say, hey, if you have these kind of queries, email them to me. We'll schedule a time. So I know that ultimately they'd shortlisted 15, I think, or something to that effect. We were one of the few in the initial shortlist. So the fact that we got one-on-one time, the fact that we could run our approach by the gentleman even before we submitted our RFP, I think that was a very, very beautiful way to have done it. It showed a lot of seriousness and skin in the game from either end. So I think those bits really, really worked well. My last, I don't know, Sunaina, maybe if I could ask you that. I often wonder, a lot of times a communication RFP is a comms RFP, right? Which means it's not just PR, it's probably social media, it's design, it's OOH and the likes. So I wish we could use tech to our advantage. We could hyperlink, for example, if this is a section that you're going to do, just jump to section 2B and then jump to section 2A. So I wish that there was a way that we could also navigate it better, I think, to save time. So while I understand that, for example, a government RFP does require, a hand and a leg and then some to basically answer, but I wish there was a way to also just make it easier to navigate a process.
So I think, to be fair, government PSU RFPs do give you that, like they have a very well detailed out index. So you can really see that, whether you want to, whether this is an RFP for you or not, because if the skew towards core marketing is 70%, then you know that that's not an RFP for you unless you're going to be able to partner with a marketing or an advertising agency. But government RFPs do that. And the good part is that, and I think some of the big corporates have started doing this as well, be able to clearly call out your guardrails and non-negotiables. So especially in government RFPs, they clearly call out the non-negotiables. So if you know that, if I have a competing client or if I don't have this, relevant experience, there's no point in me putting, going in for this RFP because I won't be qualified. I won't make it to the shortlist also. So I think that definitely is. See, again, a lot of what we are discussing comes down to the fact that whether you've seriously thought about creating an RFP and whether you are serious in your quest for the right partner. It's a bit like, maybe a bit of an hyperbole, but it's a bit like if you're serious about dating or finding a life partner, You spend time in putting together your profile, or you spend time, you invest time in meeting people who you think fit your criteria. But if you're just going to have fun, then you don't care how many people swipe right or left. It's a bit like that with an RFP. If you're serious in finding the right partner for your brand, for your organization, you will spend the time, you will show you will show your dedication, you will show the effort, you will take your, most important, you will take in, the other decision makers in the organization, your leadership, you will take in their inputs as well. A bit like, if you're putting together your profile, you will probably think about that, oh, I'm serious about it. So, maybe talk to your friends, family. So I think it's a bit like finding the right partner. If you're serious about it, you will put the effort because you want the process to succeed and you want the right partner at the end of this long, tedious process. But if you're not serious, then all of this discussion is for waste.
Absolutely. There's another interesting thing. There's an interesting point that both of you made, that it always reflects the maturity of the team on the other end as well, the ones that are making the RFP. And then you got to choose whether you would like to work with this team. Do you want to educate them and bring them up to that level so that maybe the next pitch or the next PR brief or the next RFP is more relevant to the PR industry? Or would you kind of just not want to invest your time in it? A lot of the RFPs that I have seen from the FMCG sector specifically, right, when they are MNCs specifically, it's always a mishmash about, they've taken an RFP from their international counterparts and they've bunged in a little bit of the India aspect of it. At the same time, there are direct liftoffs from, let's say, a digital RFP or an advertising RFP. So when it finally lands up in a PR professionals or a PR agency owner's, founder or CEO's inbox, it kind of leaves you very confused. It also then reflects whether the person who's actually shared the RFP is mature enough to be able to understand what is actually required. Have they spent time on articulating their wants, their objectives on the RFP, right? Now, this brings me to a very interesting question, right? How do you decide that an RFP is right for you? And should you say no? If you were to say no, how? Aakanksha, I'd like you to address that first.
I also think the first thing that I do want to say is that I think the agency or the CEO in question must play to their strengths, which means knowing your own positioning and knowing what you stand for when you're offering a service is extremely important. So the first is a self-evaluation to know whether you can deliver what you can't deliver. All of us know that at a certain end, there is a certain amount of risk. So at all points of time, in my opinion, 70% is what you know, 20% is what you work towards, and 10% is winging it. It's risk. It's absolute risk. In a lot of cases, 30% or 50% is risk, right? So I think knowing whether you can fulfill that criteria, firstly at your end, versus filling just a piece of paper and using other tools and mechanisms or combinations or working with somebody else to build reputation, etc., etc. So I feel level one is that. Uh, Let me give you our own example. I think TOC is a very creative company. So I think that if we were picked up for something very straight-laced, so for example, if there was something like a government RFP, I feel we may not be the right fit for it because I don't think it's not about skill set. I think it's also about orientation. I think that's not the kind of work that we perhaps want to do. That's not the way we fulfill some sort of like a thirst within the company. So it's not like you have to say yes to every RFP that comes your way. It's not about just making an X amount of money, in my opinion, over the year, because it adds up. Reputation's a fine thing, which means that you got to pick and play to your strengths, like I mentioned earlier. So we pick RFPs basis interest, obviously basis the opportunity, but also basis the opportunity cost, which means that do you think that if you service this client for the next 2 or 3 or 4 years, any one of us who's looking at applying for an RFP is not looking at a year-long business, right? We're looking at 2 years,
Right.
3 years, 5 years. Are we? What's the opportunity cost like? So if I'm going to be engaged in this for the next 5 years, how will I manage other parts, of the business? What does that mean? So I feel those are some considerations one must have. And last but not the least, just great work, right? As long as it's good work, as long as it's and whatever stage of the business, we are very, very devious towards doing creative work. At certain levels, for example, we started a new practice where I think it's just papi paid. That means money needs to come in and go out. So different strokes for different folks.
Absolutely. Sunaina, how would you like to add to that?
See, I think this is
Since
where ChatGPT.
you've also filled in a lot of RFPs,
Sorry.
during your agency stints. What is
Yeah.
it? How do you decide that this RFP is right for you?
No, so I think a lot of good points Akanksha made. Self-awareness is actually absolutely important. You should know, where. And I think this is where you can actually make smart use of ChatGPT. It's good to put in an RFP, a long document in ChatGPT and get some good critical insights with right prompts as to what is the crux of what this RFP wants, at least from a written document. And once you've, spoken, had your consultations or so, you will know whether this is something you want, something you have to, something you can. If the answer to all these three questions is a yes, go for an RFP. If the answer to at least two of the questions is yes, go for an RFP. But if only one of the criteria is getting fulfilled, then perhaps that's not the best RFP for you to go forward, because every RFP comes, as Akanksha also said, the return on investment you have to see, because you will be dedicating a fair amount of senior, mid-level, people time. You will be putting in effort in thinking at the cost of something else. And every agency is, struggling with resources. Everybody's struggling with resources. So you're going to be taking time out of your everyday routine to put together an RFP, which, if you at the core of it feel like you will not really stand at, a good chance, then best not to do it. So I think self awareness is important. Be able to answer the question that can I, should I, do I have to, and then decide whether it is then is something that works for you or not. And sometimes
Absolutely.
there are external. Sorry, last point. Sometimes there are external reasons, because you may have a conflicting client, and you may feel that, okay, this business is paying me significantly more and I may have a higher chance of getting that business. Then you have to evaluate those edge cases as well, that if I give up an existing client and go in for a chance of going for a competing business at a much higher cost, is that something I can do or not?
Absolutely. And if you need to say that and articulate that, there are various formats, there are various ways in which you can do that. But most importantly, be polite. Thank the person for thinking about you, to have sent, to be able to have sent you that RFP, and politely refuse the business if you think you're not right for it. But now, if you do decide to take up that RFP, right? What are the best practices to respond to an RFP? And I'm using the term a little more loosely to cover PR briefs and PR pitches and requests for pitches as well. Akansha, I'd like you to address that first.
Got it. I also want to address this with a comment that Ruchika has made, on the chat, which is that I think that we're lucky to be in a technological age where you have Slides Go, you have Google PPTs, you have Canva. So I genuinely feel that jo dikhta hai, wo bikta hai. So I just want to address that part where I don't think design is a challenge. I think design is a must, which means that it's not about making it look phenomenally beautiful. It's about being succinct, but it's also about making sure it's pleasing to the eye. So, I do want to call that out, saying that when we do submit our RFPs, unless they've asked for it in a certain format, if it is a presentation, let's concentrate on how good it looks, because that's important. It also shows how put together, or your ability to, represent a communication point of view. So that's one part of it. The second part of it, I think, I'm sorry if this is going to sound like a PPT class, but I think that we can say more by saying less. So I think that if we can, and we are in the PR industry, right? So it's our job to shorten and to simplify. So if we're able to address all pointers that are required in a good RFP when we're responding to it in a very succinct manner, find the right kind of visual references. That means, like Sunaina was mentioning, right? Spend time. So if you know at the other end there's a great CopCom team that spent time creating a good RFP, you owe it to them, I feel, or owe it to the job to also create a good RFP in return, right? So I think that spending time creating great visuals is extremely important. And last but not the least, in my opinion, doing a great brainstorm to basically make sure you've got multiple perspectives. And in this case, across levels, which means anyone from a junior level to a mid-side level. In fact, in our case, we also make at the end of the day, we make our finance heads sit on a particular RFP that we're submitting to make sure, hey, this is the opportunity cost, like I mentioned earlier. If I had to replace, let's say, a talent or a resource midway, what do those costings look like, so that then we can submit it, right? So I feel that these are some very basic things that we could perhaps look into.
Absolutely. So, Nana, would you want to add to that? And there's a very interesting question that I'm going to tag on to, with a request from Sunaina to respond to it. A lot of times, Mo has an interesting point to add to it. A lot of times when you say creative ideas, you want creative ideas from the PR team, right? We don't really have an IP proprietary methodology to be able to, own that idea, right? A lot of times she mentions that despite the agency not winning the pitch, you often find brands implementing that with another agency, right? After the pitch presentation, etc. This practice has been long existing. Do you think there is a way around it for agencies to protect themselves?
See, this is not, I think, advertising agencies face this a lot more because, the detailing of an idea, a creative idea for an ad agency is usually, and the requirement to present and detail a creative idea along with investments in creating mock-ups and everything is a far higher for an advertising agency. So they've also been facing this because a lot of clients don't want to pay for a pitch process. In some countries they do, but most clients don't want to pay for that. And yeah, it is a practice that they do that. I think uh, maybe at some stage there could be a process, or there could be something where agencies are able to copyright or get to detailing when they are at a certain stage. If you're the top three shortlisted, maybe it makes sense there. Sadly, none at this point in time, and I think it's a ethics question. If you are an ethical organization, if you are a ethical team, you will also respect the agency that's doing the RFP and respect them for respect the IP as well. I mean, that's all I can say on that point. But again, Mo, I think the thing is also sometimes the repeat offenders. It's a big world, but it's a very small world as well. So most of the
True.
time, a lot of us will come to know that, oh, this client or this brand or this entity is like a repeat offender. They will take your ideas and then go and implement it with somebody who's willing to work with them at very low cost. So I think some discussion around that merits how you're doing it. But yeah, there has to be a more process, I think, on this as well. How do we put together an RFP? Again, I think if you've spent time in going through the RFP, you will understand the requirement of the people. And one point, try and find out who will be present for the presentation or the discussions. That'll give you a sense of how you need to structure your presentation. If you're in a room, like for example, I've filled some RFPs where in the room, the decision makers, when you're finally presenting, the decision makers are perhaps more old school method. They will perhaps not appreciate quirky, sassy presentations. But if your room is a room of young creative professionals, they will appreciate you going extra mile to put together a visually stunning presentation. So always try and see, and that's not an information that should be hidden from you in any case. Always try and understand who are the people present in the room, who are you going to be talking to. Try and do a little bit of research on them. LinkedIn, Insta, all of us have enough social footprints for you to understand the people you're going to be interacting with. It'll also give you a way to be able to practice and structure how you're going to present to a room full of, hopefully not absolute strangers, if you've done a little bit of research, and also help you structure your thoughts, your presentation, your visual style, and perhaps get the best team in the room that will be able to connect with the other side of the table in a short span of time. And that's usually sometimes going to be your advantage when you're presenting with a bunch of other agencies as well.
Absolutely. In fact, though I do feel that PR agencies, as compared to advertising agencies, get the short end of the stick here. Because if you've created a mock up, you've created an ad, and if a brand chooses to use that, and there have been cases in the past where brands have gotten sued by agencies. However, with PR, it's very difficult because, in PR, to be creative, you really got to delve deep, but there is no way that you can own the idea or create an IP out of it or make that proprietary information, right? One of the key things that I have found really helps to for you to be able to suss that out, as Sunaina said, to be able to figure out whether the person is serious enough, is to ask for a meeting before the pitch presentation. At least with the copcom head or the marketing head, before the entire room or the panel convenes for your entire pitch presentation. I think it really works if you get the copcom on board and ask them some direct questions. How sure are they about their budgets? How sure are they about taking on an agency partner? And if they already have an existing partner, ask them about the challenges that they are facing, because very often once the pitch presentation is done, you pretty much get an email saying we've decided to continue with our existing agency. That means all that effort was for naught, and all that effort was simply a fishing expedition. Which brings me to a very interesting question that Arun has asked. Now, do you think this RFP process should be tagged with a fee that the agency should charge for the pitch? Because they really need to prepare for the creative process, and I know that ad agencies have started requesting for it. When do you think this is good practice, and when do you think we'll be able to do this?
Go for it, but I think a lot of us are on the session are also in communication position, so you need to answer this in-house, I think, and especially if you make a switch from an agency to a copcom position, be able to answer that for yourself in a copcom role as well. Would you want to pay for agency pitch? And if you feel that the effort is significant, then you should think hard and say that, okay, maybe at a stage. So I'll give you an example, like what Aakanksha said, that if you are a brand looking to enter India, for example, and you've shortlisted a set of 3 or 4 agencies, and now you're at a stage where you're going to be detailing out how the execution will roll out. That level of detailing, that level of ideation should ideally come with a base level of pitching fee. Because you also know, the agencies also know that at the end of the day, you will shortlist one, but you're still taking a lot of inputs. You're also taking a lot of cultural insights, nuances of starting off a market entry strategy from the 2 other who are not going to get shortlisted. They should at least be compensated for their ideation and for for the time that they put in. But to say that I want to put a fee, a pitching fee at the beginning of the process may not work, because that's the time when a lot of sifting is happening. But I think if you are at a stage where you are going to get into a significant amount of detailing, uh, at that stage, as a copcom person and as an agency person, there should be some understanding of pitching fee, that if you get to this process, then we understand that you're amongst the top that we want to work with, and therefore, because we want to take the discussion forward, we should also learn to respect your time and your leadership involvement, and compensate you for it, all for it.
I have a slightly different perspective. Um,
Absolutely. Akansha, I'm
I
going to ask you the same question. I'm going to ask you the same question with a little bit of a twist to it. Now, I would like you to answer this, but if you were to draft the RFP, if an agency were to draft an RFP, right, what would it look like? And I'm sure it'll come with an agency pitch fee.
so I'd want to give my perspective first and then perhaps lead into your question. I think we need to decide whether we are in a position of a seller's market or a buyer's market when we're making that pitch. Which means that if it is a buyer's market, there is no way you dictate the terms, right? So, in which case, what you can do is establish a better relationship, and you have to play. It's a game of chess. You don't have to win every time. You have to look at it from a long term perspective and make your moves accordingly. So, if it's a buyer's market, In which case, and this is India at the end of the day, this is not a more mature market. For example, Australia actually has some of the best communication that you will ever see, in which case people understand effort comes at a certain cost or a certain price. All of us here know that we've signed a particular client RFP or not, and then gone then and beyond 50% extra, if you may call it, from an effort perspective, because it's an Indian thing to do. That's who we are, especially women in leadership positions in communication. We're notoriously, we're notorious for doing this. So I think if it's a buyer's market, there is no way you can charge a fee, and that's the practical truth. If it's a seller's market, and I think if you're one of the top three agencies in that space, in which case you can dictate how you want to run the process. I don't think it's about charging money for a pitch or not. I think it's about the process in itself. I am very proud to have peers who are probably better than me or equally good, I hope, and go neck to neck with them. And that itself for me is an enjoyable process to learn what did better so that I can make more money in the long term. I don't want to earn 10,000 rupees for a pitch, right? I think the idea is to just have seriousness on the table. So whatever it takes to get seriousness on the table, whether it's a meeting, whether it's a fee, whatever it takes. So it depends on whether it's a buyer's market or whether it is a seller's market, in my opinion. Now, if I had to make an RFP myself, I think as an agency, like I said earlier, I would put down how to measure creative ideas in a much better format. I think at the end of the day, there are two parts. Keeping, like, if I were to just look at brass tacks, one is ideation, and the second is execution of thus ideation. So if we are clear on how execution could happen, so I could think about, hey, I will execute this, let's say across 10 cities, but the client knows that, hey, no, these are my top 4 cities, which means my budget's reduced, which means my resources reduce, which means XYZ. So I think
Right.
that if the client or myself, if I was creating an RFP, I could be very, very particular about how I would measure a creative idea and how I would want any idea to be executed, at least guardrails around it. I think 50% of us would probably do a bang on better job. And secondly, like I said, potential crisis scenarios. I think knowing whether I can tackle that or not is extremely important. So those would be two things I would definitely put in.
Absolutely. So I'm going to take last two questions from the audience. We've got a lot of questions coming in, which I think the both the panelists will answer during the weekend. I'm taking the liberty to say that. But two interesting questions that I'd like each one of you to address one by one. Aakanksha, this one's for you. Pooja has a very interesting question. In the era of immense visibility, why do communication agencies need to share ideas to build brands, instead simply showcase what has worked well? Do you agree, disagree?
We really don't need. I absolutely vociferously agree with Pooja Trehan on this, because I think that gone are the times when, at least for a short list, let's say you want to get top 5 people in the room, I think the ability of delivery has already been proved. So I think if you're evaluating for the finale round of it, or let's say you want to make a choice, I think, which is when you say, hey, this is what I want you to do, a mock for that matter. A lot of us have done Model United Nations, for example, right, in schools. So revive that process, like make us do a mock, in a room when you know you're one of the final shortlists. But if you need to submit a pitch and I still have to prove myself, then I'm probably not the right partner.
I like that. Sunaina, this one's for you. Vishal Thapa has a very interesting uh, question. At times, you're not in a position to divulge multiple issues. So I'm assuming this is from a brand's perspective. Multiple issues you're planning to address through the consultancy engagement. Should the organization keep some of the safer ones in the RFP and call for a clarification session on the other critical points when it feels it is better to divulge the info one-on-one rather than an RFP document in public domain?
Again, this would be case to case basis. I think, again, if you have clarity, if you know that, okay, there is a reason why I am putting out an RFP, and I would like to see, I think if it is something that's fairly confidential, I don't think any brand is going to go for an RFP, because an RFP is by nature is a very public exercise. If you're planning to sack the CEO of an organization and you want somebody to manage that crisis, you're not going to go in for an RFP. So,
Right.
RFP is a very public process by nature. You may not invite all agencies, but RFP document is going to get circulated. However, you may still want to which is why consultations, usually good RFP issuing entities will always keep a consultation in a closed room after they have shortlisted a few people, to be able to get more clarity, because sometimes when you're writing an RFP, you're writing it from a different from a certain lens, and the people who are filling the RFP are seeing it from a different lens as well. So there are certain points of contention that get clarified when you are in a room together. But if you have very confidential issues, then I don't think an RFP is the right way for you to go. Then you're better suited to talk to maybe 3 or 4 agencies who you think can best help you, or individuals, and have a more one-on-one conversation with them.
Absolutely. And with that, we'll come to the quick rapid fire round. Sunaina, I'm going to go with you first. Don't take more than a second to answer this. I want the first thought off your head. First question: how many RFPs have you responded in your career?
Number is upwards of 200, I guess. More
Was
than
that
that.
time well spent?
Some yes, some no. It's like some of them was
Your
this could
one
have been
best advice
this
to
could have
brand.
been an email. Sometimes you
Your
answer
one
a
best
request on
advice.
email, as this could have been an email. Some of the RFPs were like that.
Okay. Your one best advice to brands making an RFP today after this session.
Uh, be absolutely clear on what you want as output and outcome. Nobody is a psychotherapist, and people can't read your mind. You have to be clear as to what you want out of this exercise by engaging somebody externally.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. Akansha, you next. One takeaway you would advise agencies to focus on from this discussion today.
Decide whether you want to play the game or not, whether you want to RFP or not RFP. Don't just run into it, make a decision.
Yeah. Awesome. Top pet peeve when reading an RFP.
Language. Biggest
Okay.
problem is language and the way it's structured.
Okay. Your best advice to agency professionals tasked with evaluating RFPs for their teams.
Take advice, ask others, especially if you're doing it for the first time, ask others as to how it was executed or how it was done. And if you're doing it for the 100th time, ask others, take advice, and do the same thing anyway.
So I'm going to, announce the results of the rapid fire on our LinkedIn page. So please watch out for that. And with that, we'll call this session to a close. Thank you so much for being a part of this session. I think it was absolutely informative, insightful, and engaging for all our audiences. And I'm sure they'll respect the fact that you took out your time to be able to address this topic for us today. Thank you so much.
Thank
So
you.
much.
Thank you for everybody who participated, gave us an hour or so of their Saturday morning. Truly appreciate. Weekends are very sacrosanct for everybody. And thank you, Tarun, PRPOI, and CommsAdda for organizing it. And hopefully, you guys are no longer as afraid of this big bad word called RFP anymore after this. And I'm taking this liberty to say on behalf of me and Aakanksha, we are available on LinkedIn. If there's anything you want to ask us or anything, please feel free to ping, and maybe we'll be able to help you a little bit more or learn from you as well.
In my closing note, I just want to share a short snippet of a conversation I had with Tarun. Like I mentioned, I'm a very shy person. I'm not somebody who likes doing panels or the likes quite a bit, but she's changed my opinion single handedly. And I'm very grateful because on a forum like this, while we are sharing and being experts, I think we're also learning from each other. So all the comments that, Mo or Pooja have put forward in the comments, or, Sunaina, Tarun, the conversation we've had today. So I'm taking away a lot from this discussion. So thank you so much. And of course, a shout out to all the partners who supported us in this journey. And thank you for having us.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So I'm going to remove the both of you off screen right now. And to our audience, if you have more questions, please put them in the comment section and tag the panelist and they will answer them for you. This is a discussion I think we should continue to have. So that was Aakanksha Gupta, founder and CEO of The Other Circle, and Sunaina Jairath sharing the insights from the world of RFPs. Thank you again to CommsAdda for collaborating with us on this conversation, and my co-founders Pooja and Sonali for their continued support to the PR community. Like I mentioned, if you have more questions, then put them in the comment section, tagging the panelists, and we will answer them. By the way, all our episodes are now simulcasted on YouTube and LinkedIn, so you can watch it there too. Before you go, take a look at the PR Agency Insight survey that we are putting together in collaboration with PR and Comms Collaborative. In a true community collaboration, robust communities like IPRF, Media Connect, OneSource, and PR Rangers are also supporting us in the same. So if you work in a PR agency in India, then take 5 minutes to add your voice to it. We will see you next month with another equally intriguing conversation on PR. Till then, let's talk, engage, and learn together on PRPOI.